This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, real MVPs? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And I can't remember, last week was the week you were out on assignment, right?
Correct.
That's right, because we were then in studio on Tuesday, and that was when I was able to officially make that joke. But you're back here on the Primetime Podcast. How was your assignment, by the way?
It was good. You guys gave me a good one.
I should know what the assignment is, because I technically would have given it to you if you really were out on assignment, but we're just going to say you were out on assignment. But we're in the studio today. Got some great topics for you, talking some college football like we always do. College football, college basketball. College basketball is going to be coming up, though, soon. In a month, Brandon, we'll have Midnight Madness, and college basketball will officially be underway. But before we get into everything we're going to talk about today, a little bit of housekeeping. I'll get through it nice and quick. You want to make sure you help support us. Check out patreon.com/mostvaluablepodcast. If you join us at the $10 tier, you can join a podcast each and every month you are at that tier. You can also go to our store in the description as well and donate for a call-in. As Brandon coughed into, he didn't cough into the mic. I wasn't looking at you. You did the lean away. A little dab there from Brandon. But you can also, in our store, we've got the call-in option. We've also got the shirt that you can see Dave modeling off. You can also get that at mostvaluablepodcast.com that you can catch each and every day. And then last but not least, if you're on Apple Podcasts and if you're on iTunes, and Brandon, I am excited for this one because I looked last night. We got two new ones.
Good.
And I'm going to read them here on the podcast because I am excited for it. Because if you guys have been checking us out, I have been on my high horse that we are not a couple of good old boys. And we got two new reviews. The first one coming from Diamond DG8 says, in-depth review from... Oh, I can't read the full title, but he gave us a 5-star rating, so thank you for that. They cover all news that pops up related to college sports, no matter what conference, and are a great different point of view rather than just listening to what the analysts have to say on a specific topic. And then we got Top Notch Pod, 5-star rating from TMP98. Thank you for the rating. He said, great overall content, wide variety of college sports information with their true thoughts on the subject. So I am happy that we're officially not a couple of good old boys.
Finally!
We have made it, Brandon. We have officially made it and are not a couple of good old boys. However, today we are talking about the SEC later in the podcast. If you guys could please, if you have iTunes, have Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star rating. It'd really mean the world to us, and let us know why you like listening to the podcast or why you don't like listening to the podcast. But I hope you like listening to the podcast each and every week. Brandon, today we're going to be looking at some 3 big topics before we make our picks in Week 7. We're going to look at Notre Dame and their college football playoff chances. We're going to look at the Wisconsin-Michigan game and how that will affect the Big Ten title race. And then we're going to look at Georgia's upcoming schedule. They've got LSU, Florida, Kentucky, and Auburn on the docket. Will they be able to survive en route to another SEC title game and hopefully for the Bulldog fans, a college football playoff appearance? But I want to start with Notre Dame. This is a team that over the weekend, this is probably going to be the last ranked opponent that they see on their schedule the rest of the year, if maybe not a Northwestern kind of cracks the top 25. But Notre Dame getting the 45-23 victory this weekend over the Virginia Tech Hokies in Blacksburg, Virginia. I'm just going to ask you, plain and simple, will Notre Dame, like after this win, what is your answer to will Notre Dame make the college football playoff?
Well, Ricky, I think that with kind of what you said is the rest of their schedule, the rest of the way out, they already had their toughest opponents, and those are in the rearview mirror, and they've ended up 6-0 to this point. So the rest of the way out, I don't see anyone that's really going to be a stumbling block in their way. So right now, I really think that the Fighting Irish, they control their own destiny. If they win out, I really do believe that they will be a college football playoff team. And the reason why I believe that is right now, Georgia is one of those top 4 teams. I don't think Georgia's going to be there at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I think Alabama will. I think Ohio State will. I think there's a very good chance that Clemson will as well. And then I think Notre Dame could be that fourth team, that third, but most likely fourth team that comes in there, where we sit at today. And the reason I think that is because if they go the rest of this way with already beating Michigan, that's still a ranked team, with beating Stanford, still a ranked team, not as high of a ranking as they were before, beating Virginia Tech when they were ranked, even though Virginia Tech hasn't been as great of a team as we saw last year, those are still 3 games that you've beaten ranked opponents, and then you blow out Wake Forest on the road. You beat Vanderbilt, a tough game at home. You beat them 22-17 in a difficult matchup, I think, for the Fighting Irish. This has been a good team throughout the year. I think making the move to go to Ian Book as opposed to Brandon Wimbush was a really good move for the Irish there. Brian Kelly has been smart this season, while in the last couple of years I've given him flack for being a terrible decision maker and actually lacking leadership. I think he's made some really good positive decisions, and he's shown leadership this year. And that's why Notre Dame's in the spot that they're in. Now, I know I've always said about Brian Kelly, when the good's good, it's great. When the bad's bad, you don't want to be anywhere near him. But this has been a really good football team. And right now, like I said, I think they control their own destiny the rest of the way out.
And you kind of just hit 2 of my points with Notre Dame. I want to go into a little bit of the other teams and what we have, but I'm going to push that to the side to make these 2 points. Number 1, when it comes to Notre Dame, I feel like the rest of the way regular season, the only one that can get in Notre Dame's way is Notre Dame. And the reason why I say that is, even look at this Virginia Tech game that you had this past weekend. If I showed you tape of the first half and said, all right, put your money on it, who wins this game, there might be some people that go, you know what, I'm going to ride with the Hokies in the second half. There might be other people that say, I'm going to ride with Notre Dame. If I showed you just tape of the second half and said, how do you think the first half went, without showing you the score, I just showed you the play on the field, most people would say, man, Notre Dame probably was clicking on all cylinders in the first half. This is going to be Notre Dame's problem, if there is one. Are they going to get in their own way? Like, there was a play this past weekend also where you had a targeting penalty with one of the Fighting Irish's key defensive guys, and it's like, I'm sitting there watching that with Dave and Sean at the time while we're flipping in between the UFC fight and the Notre Dame Virginia Tech game, and I'm sitting there going, you got to know better. Like, especially if you're one of the top guys on defense, you got to know better not to commit that penalty and basically get taken out of the rest of that game. The second point that leads into, and I want to ask you, is because you've got some Irish shade in you with being a Notre Dame Fighting Irish fan. When I go to work, there are some other teachers along with me that work there that are Irish fans. And one of them is, all year he's been saying, you know, this could be a year kind of like 2012 where we go undefeated, we're playing really well, and then it's like, oh, wait, the opponents that you really played were not really that well, and then you play in Alabama and just get spanked. And people could say, Virginia Tech, without their starting quarterback who's out with injury, they were dinged up. Stanford, not really the team that we thought they would be. I mean, they were 7 at the time when they played Notre Dame, but this is a Stanford team that just lost to Utah in Stanford this past weekend.
And let's make sure that we give a little credit to Utah. That's a pretty good Utah team.
And then Michigan, the good thing, though, for Notre Dame is that Michigan didn't look good that first game, but Michigan has been picking it up and kind of looks like a better team than that first week of the season. And then the rest of their opponents you're probably, to me, the toughest games that I look at. Sean says he's nervous about that Syracuse game. I mean, Syracuse can be an opponent that can upset the Irish, but if you take care of business, kind of like what Clemson did, even though they had an injury to Trevor Lawrence, they won the game. And then Sean also told me, because he was an Irish fan, said that Trojan game scares him nonetheless because anything can happen when Notre Dame and USC get together. I want to ask you, are you kind of in that mindset that this could be, yeah, we go undefeated this year, and then when you play in Alabama, when you play in Ohio State, that's maybe when Notre Dame could have a problem this year? Or do they not have a problem and hold up with the Ohio States, the Alabamas of the world?
Well, I don't necessarily know about that because I think that we've also looked in years past. We've seen games that excuse me, that we thought we were going to get these just absolutely outstanding games. When we saw Oklahoma play in the playoff, not last year, but a couple of years back, and I think they played Clemson, and we all saw, oh, this is going to be a really good game. Clemson comes out and just destroys them, and everyone thought that they were on the same level. Or
like last year's Alabama Clemson game. We thought that was going to be the epic three-peat, and then Alabama just steamrolled them.
Or that one, or wasn't it when Clemson played Ohio State, and that was a completely one-sided, lopsided game. So even the teams that everyone's like, oh, they're on the same level, this is going to be a good game, they don't always happen to be like that. It's all about game planning and adjustments at halftime and everything like that. That's the most important thing. And this past week for Notre Dame, they made great adjustments at halftime to come out and really show that they were the better team in that game. But to get to the kind of the second half here, while I think that Notre Dame can win the rest of their games, look at the Navy game. That has been a close game in years past between those two teams. This Northwestern team seems like a pretty determined team right now, and
picking it up at the right time.
They're not looking bad in the Big Ten. They just upset Michigan State at Michigan State. This is a Michigan State team that has been a huge disappointment the entire year, and they have no business being in the top 25, so they better not be there. And then Florida State. This is a Florida State that is right now, I think, so up and down. You're not even sure what's going on with them. And unfortunately for them, they're so up and down within the same game. They jump out to a huge 27-7 lead over Miami this past week to just see their hearts broken, 28-27 with Miami getting the win. Syracuse is an improved team. We've seen it this year, and we saw how they played against Clemson. And then, of course, USC, certainly not being the USC team that they've been in years past, but it being at the Coliseum and it being a chance for them to possibly play spoiler, that always gets teams up. So while I do think that the most difficult part for this for this Notre Dame Fighting Irish team is in the rearview mirror, they still have plenty of interesting games on the docket for the rest of the way that could really affect things. So the pedal needs to continue to still be to the metal. And I really think, Ricky, that if they were to get into the playoffs, it doesn't necessarily matter that, oh, well, Notre Dame, they're maybe not on the same level as Alabama, and everyone remembers what happened in Notre Dame, Alabama. These are different teams. These are different players. And I think that there would be different outcomes. Not saying that Alabama would lose to Notre Dame if they met up, but you can't say, well, because history shows that this is how it happened. That's exactly how it's going to happen.
And I'm not saying necessarily, like, when I've heard that, it's not saying like, oh, we're taking it verbatim from history, but it's like, oh, I've seen this before kind of a thing. With Alabama, though, like this year's Alabama, yeah, they've looked like a juggernaut, but I know there's going to be people out there. We've had them in the comment section saying, well, who has Alabama played so far? What cupcake team have they played so far?
Sure. I think that, you can look at a number of these different Power Fives as people have tried to point out to you and I in our comment section, and I certainly understand it. I am not a proponent for Alabama playing the Citadel on their second to last game of the season. I would be much more of a proponent for Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State. And Ohio State usually does a pretty good job of it. But seeing Alabama and Clemson play more difficult games throughout the season so that people can say, well, they have a very tough conference schedule, but they've really done a good job of playing tough opponents outside of the conference schedule. I would love to see an Alabama or a Clemson schedule a UCF. But we all know why they will not, because of where UCF is right now and the type of team that they are. And they have come a long ways to be this good team that Scott Frost kind of made them. And the Clemson doesn't necessarily want to play them because they don't want to lose potentially to it. So I understand all of that. But I also think that Notre Dame, they've got a passing game. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a good running game. They've got a good, solid defense. They could go up against any of those other three teams right now. I think that you could say could be your playoff teams if it's going to be, let's say, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame. You want to throw Notre Dame in as the Final Four? I think that they could play a good game against any one of them. Would they beat all of them? I don't know. But I think that they would have a competitive game in every single one of them that you would put them in, because they have defense, they have a good quarterback in Book, they have a good running game, and they could hold up against you. They definitely could. I think definitely they could against a team like Clemson. I mean, because you saw what Syracuse was able to do against Clemson. I think that Notre Dame could do those same types of things.
Well, and I will say, for me, the turning point in the season for Notre Dame, although they were 3-0, is when they started to play Ian Book. Like, the 3 games he's been in, 56, 38, 45 points compared to 24, 24, and 21. Last thing I kind of want to look at, this is what college football playoff. So the first rankings we will get for the college football playoff are going to be, I think it's October 30th. Is our first official rankings. That's when we're going to have the first college football ranking show. That means we have 3 more weeks until that ranking. So what I'm going to do... Two. Well, we have this weekend, and then, so we'll have games on the 13th, 20th, and 27th.
Oh, excuse me. I'm looking at Notre Dame's schedule right now, and they have a bye in between there.
A lot of them have buys.
That's my fault.
And what I'm going to look at is I'm going to read off the 5 teams. So Notre Dame and then the top 4. All of them are going to have 2 games because much like Notre Dame, all of these teams have a bye within then. I want to, last thing, kind of discuss what's going to be that first top 4. Because you look at Notre Dame, they've got Pitt and Navy. To me, although that Navy game has been close in the past, I think Notre Dame should be able to get it done. And before I go into this, I have to say, Notre Dame's answer is easy. Take care of business, go undefeated. You should be a playoff team at the end of the year. You lose one of these games, then you're not going to get in because you don't have that conference championship game, that conference championship to lean on. So I think in the next 2 before the rankings, Notre Dame should be able to get it done. Then you have Alabama. They've got Missouri, and then they've got Tennessee. Alabama should be able to get those done in my mind and win those 2 and stay at number 1. Clemson, I'm going to jump to them because they're a team. Actually, no, I'm going to jump to Ohio State, and there's a reason why. Ohio State, Minnesota, and Purdue. I'm going to say much like Alabama, should be able to take care of business in both of those games and stay undefeated. The thing that is important for Notre Dame now are these next 2. If Notre Dame takes care of business, wins the next 2, I mean, Clemson's got NC State. Yeah, it's at home, but they got NC State and Florida State. Clemson, I'm going to put a question mark by that NC State game. Although I'll probably favor them in that game, that could be a game where they get upset, and then it makes it interesting. And then Georgia, we're going to look at them more in depth later in the podcast. They go to LSU and then play Florida on a neutral site. They probably got the toughest next 2. The toughest 2 to win to stay in the top 4 and keep Notre Dame at bay at number 5.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's really interesting, when you do take a look at where the rest of these, top teams are at, and for a lot of them, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be, can they take care of business the rest of the way out? And I personally think that the most difficult one for out of all of these is what ultimately I'm trying to say. The most difficult schedule, it is Georgia. Georgia is really if Georgia can take care of business with all these teams they have coming up, with LSU on the road at LSU, with Florida at home, on the road at Kentucky, home versus Auburn. We talked about this just last week. Then Georgia, they should be a playoff team. They should maybe be the number 1 team in the playoff.
Probably would be.
If they can do all of that. I don't think they will. And that's why it's going, in my mind, it's going to leave the door open for one more team. Who's that going to be? Is it going to be Notre Dame? Is the Big 12 going to get lucky? Are they going to get West Virginia in, or a team like that? Especially now with the one loss by Texas after their huge win in the Red River rivalry this past weekend, and Oklahoma now with the one loss. If things work out for West Virginia, if Notre Dame loses, if Georgia's got a loss, the Big 12 maybe sneaks in. There's a number of different things that could happen here, but the most difficult road, it's going to be for the Georgia Bulldogs. For Alabama, I think that they've got a road that isn't terribly daunting in my mind. With Mizzou, they should beat them. Tennessee shouldn't be difficult. You've got LSU at LSU, and then Mississippi State, and then Auburn to end the year. But that's not. With what Auburn has done, Auburn has been showing, I think, kind of week after week that they're not as good as what people thought. Not for this season, at least. And the team that I think is probably in the best spot right now, I would say, is Ohio State.
No, they are.
I think almost hands down, Ohio State looks to be in the best spot out of any of those top teams right now.
No, I agree, because besides Michigan, I'm not scared of anybody on their remaining schedule. I know Maryland has been good, but I'm not scared of Maryland against Ohio State. The last thing to kind of wrap it up is, here's the last thing I'll say. One team I want to watch out for by the time we get to those first rankings, that this could be a team that sneaks into the top 5, maybe even the top 4, kind of like Texas A&M. Remember Texas A&M last year? What? How are they at 4? What's this monstrosity? And then they didn't make the playoff. Remember that? That team this year, Washington. And the reason why I say that, if Georgia loses one or two of its next 2, if Clemson loses to NC State, Washington has Oregon, who's ranked, Colorado, who's ranked, and then Cal, 2 of those being road games. If they win all 3 of those games before the rankings come out, Washington could be favored in the committee's eyes, and I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia losing and Clemson losing, if Washington kind of jumps up in there as a one-loss team to take everything. West Virginia, who you mentioned, they get Iowa State and Baylor before the rankings, so I don't know if they crack the top 5. They might be put at 7 where they're at right now, but this is where I want you guys to come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Notre Dame, what are your feelings about them? Will they make the playoff? Will they not make the playoff? What's your feeling with some of these top playoff teams as we get closer and closer to those first rankings on October 30th? Let us know what you think down below in the comment section.